You can live a life full of love and light if you just let the Spirit guide you. It's the remedy where you'll find peace, but you must let the Spirit guide you.
Who made y'all priests?
What's up, world? This is Awo Fafore.
This is Awo Oseun. Welcome back to the Who Made Y'all Priests podcast, where we talk about our spiritual journeys, our everyday life experiences, and the issues of the time from the perspective of two people who just happen to be priests. Fafore, what's going on, man?
Hey, you know what? I always say this at the towards the end, but I want to get this out right now. Family, please smash that like button for us. Hit that like button. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead and subscribe if you ain't subscribed. And you know y'all gonna like the episode, so just go ahead and share it right now.
Right. Yeah, get on that right now.
Just get all that out the way. You know what I'm saying? You know, show us some
so you
love.
can enjoy this episode. So you can enjoy this episode, man. What we got for the people this week?
Hey, you know what? This episode is so powerful. The guest that we're having is so dope. We're not even gonna waste time with small talk today, so we just gonna get right to the interview.
Aboro boy, how are you?
Boy, Bashisha, it's really a blessing to be here. I want to, for the serious students of IFA out there, I want to share that my Odu for this morning was Osatura, which compels me to be honest and speak the truth. So I don't know what questions are going to be asked, but we're going to get some straight talk. Sometimes I hedge my bets a little bit to be diplomatic, but Ifa said today that's not an option. Also, when I threw for this blog itself, I got EJ Ogbe, which is doing the right thing with the right people at the right time for the right reason to accomplish the right thing for the benefit of everybody. And I would suggest that that's about as good as it gets. So I'm looking forward. Hopefully we'll learn a few things and share some ideas. And, I really want it to be a conversation. I like the idea that you didn't give me a heads up on what you wanted to talk about. Spontaneous. I will warn you, sometimes I go in and out of an altered state, and it can be subtle, and at times it's obvious, but not to worry. That's really the source of my inspiration, certainly. I was really, really blessed in Ode Remo to have them connect me with an ancestral spirit that has been very helpful in my training and teaching. And sometimes if I get too far astray, he pops in and reels me back to where I should be.
I should.
Okay, I tell you.
We really appreciate you joining us, Baba. This is an honor for us. We
listen,
read all of your books. Yeah, we read all of your books. We follow you, so yeah.
So if you read all my books, then you're ready for a quiz.
We are another time, but we are definitely.
All right.
We want you to introduce yourself to the family. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you do in the world.
Yeah, okay, it's good. Listen, my birth name is David Wilson. I was given the name Awo Falokun Fatunmbi in Ode Remo in 1989, almost 35 years ago now. The name Awo Falokun Fatunmbi means the mystery at the bottom of the ocean is born again. If you think about that name, and the mystery at the bottom of the ocean is that we all come from a single interaction between the bottom of the ocean and Ogun. In other words, it's our common heritage. It's our common mother and our common father, which means that everybody on the planet is interrelated, interconnected, and part of one family. And I think the more that we're able to internalize that, believe that, and act accordingly, I think the better off it is for everybody. So that's not really a full introduction. So what I studied comparative religion in UC Santa Barbara. I was really, really blessed to study with the late, great Paul Tillich, who in Christian circles is kind of like Elvis. He created the curriculum for what I would call liberal Christian theological dialogue. He was the first person Hitler kicked out of Germany. And
Oh, wow.
he came to America. He's 50 years old, learned English for the first time. His English is impeccable. He influenced both my understanding of how to analyze liturgical religious words from any tradition. He also he was really responsible for my style of writing. If you know me, I'm a little bit laid back and I like to have fun and tell tall tales and stories, but my writing style is a little formal, so sometimes people expect me to be more like the way I write. But I really was influenced by Tillich, who his style was very simple. He'd define a word and then show how the word unfolds and then show how it relates to the bigger scheme of things. And that's been mostly what I've done throughout my career. Before devoting, let's say, full-time to IFA, I worked for criminal defense attorneys. I did trial preparation, investigations. I worked on a lot of very high-profile cases. People hate it when I say it, but a defense attorney, you defend the bad guys because they deserve an honorable defense. I defended Sirhan, James Earl Ray, Arthur Bremer. I defended all the Black Panther cases in Oakland, Eldridge Cleaver, Bobby Seale, Huey Newton. And I have to say, as a result of that experience, I got really disillusioned with the justices. Growing up, I was a firm believer in the Constitution and the law as an equal arbitrator. Things got more and more apparently corrupt as I worked more and more in the system. I actually, believe it or not, was part of the first team hired to investigate the Watergate burglary. Congress hired me and 5 others to find out what happened. We found out what happened. And then as soon as we told them, they fired us because they didn't want that cat out of the bag. That was, not good. And they spent the next 3-4 years pretending it was all about something else. So that's a long story. But I actually was fortunate to be able to live in Mexico for 5 years after leaving legal work, and was really blessed there to both study with the shamans in Mexico, but also Mexico's got over 1,000 pyramids. Most people don't realize it. It's really, the landscape is rich with just ancient monuments, most of which haven't been documented. And it's like, ooh, what is this? And people would say, oh, that's the pyramid. I said, yeah, I can see that, but what is it? I mean, this is odd. So that sparked my curiosity. The other thing I think is probably important in my story is in I think it was 1971, I was blessed to be initiated in my ancestral lineage. My ancestors come from a part of Eastern Europe that was originally in Hungary called Transylvania. Everybody laughs and makes jokes and vampires and dragons, but that's actually a very noble tradition. The word vampire means medium in the Hungarian. The vampires were like the priestesses of the ancient religion, and Drakal is the Hungarian word for dragon. So the dragon monarchy had vampires as the mediums to support the monarchy. It's actually the oldest monarchy in Europe, and it was a serious, and still is actually, threat to the kings and queens that are anointed by the Pope. And so there was a long history of trying to denigrate the dragon tradition. You understand? So we get all kinds of silly horror stories about Transylvania. But the truth is, it was one of a half a dozen, maybe a dozen places around the world where a legacy of a golden age in a global culture before the what's called the Lesser Dryas, or the flood of 12,000 years ago. Much of that information was preserved in Transylvania because it's got the highest mountains in Eastern Europe. So the thing that's interesting about that is the Carpathian Mountains. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but if you Google search it, you'll see the tallest mountain. On the top of the highest mountain in Transylvania, there is a statue of a sphinx. And if you go from the top of that mountain and walk straight down the mountain into Bosnia, you will see a pyramid complex that's identical to the complex in Giza. Now, that's a history that's not often talked about, but for me, when I was initiated into the dragon tradition of what's called the Phineas lineage, it's actually a hereditary society. The Phineas in dragon culture is the same as Ifa. They're the priests that anoint the kings and do divination and like that. So when I was initiated, I was told that I needed to go to Africa to learn more about my own culture, And at the time I thought, well, that's goofy. I'm just hallucinating here. This can't be right. It's not good, right? So I kind of kept that to myself. But 20 years later, when I went to Orie and was initiated, the very first thing that the Arabah said to me is, at my Ita, when they were doing the divination for my life's work, they said, take an offering to the home of your grandfather and thank him for bringing you here. It's like, okay, now you got my attention here. I mean, that just can't be a coincidence. But the thing that was even more astonishing, my ancestors were keepers of what have come to be known as the Grail mysteries and that kind of focused the Odu for Hungarian Ifa is the stories of the Holy Grail and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Those stories are actually descriptions of rituals and metaphysical principles, so that my ancestors sat in a circle around a stone that was above an underground waterway, and their prayers were then taken out through the land to fertilize the land. I mean, the Horn of Plenty, that was the point of the Grail myths. So on my second trip to Nigeria, Araba Adesanya Woyede took me to Ile Ife, and he said, I want to introduce you to some people. So he introduced me to the Emishe, that's Yoruba for messenger. The Emishe is a group of 16 Awos who live in the compound of the Oni, or the king of Ile Ife, and they pray for Ifa worshippers every day. They get one day off, but every day around the clock, they do divination to see what Odu is affecting the community at large, and they do prayers for that. And they do those prayers sitting around a stone above an underground waterway. It's the exact same technology as practiced by my ancestors. They're just speaking a different language. And the truth is, the language is not all that different either, because linguistics doesn't lie. We get a lot of historical information that's just nonsense, but linguistics doesn't lie. The Kalderash language of ancient Transylvania is the mother tongue of Sumerian. Hello, you understand? Sumerian then is the mother tongue of Hebrew, all right? Or more specifically, the mother tongue of Ge'ez, which is the liturgical language of Ethiopia. Which predates Judaism. That's not a popular idea, and certainly people have the right to define their own cultures and their own faith. But if you look at the linguistics, there's some connections there, because here's the point. Yoruba language is 30% Coptic Egyptian and 30% Hebrew, which I would argue is actually Ge'ez from Ethiopia, and then 30% Kwa, the indigenous language of West Africa. So the mixture of those three languages really speaks of a mixture of cultures. You understand? And so we have a clear interaction between Sumeria and Egypt in Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is the location of a kiln that was clearly based on the Sumerian and hieroglyphic writings on the wall, run by both Sumerians and Egyptians, and it was the place where they made the primal matter for the alchemical process. And I really believe, based on my study of liturgical Yoruba words, that the sacred text of Odu Ifa is first and foremost an explanation of the science, the ritual, and the magic of alchemy, and that the alchemy was at the foundation of ancient Egyptian religion, certainly at the foundation of ancient Hungarian spiritual practice. And to the extent that we've lost that, and I don't want that to sound critical. I believe that the reason that's not generally understood is that there was deliberate appropriation of our faith that occurred when the first Yoruba English dictionary was created by Jesuit priests to translate the Bible. There's clear indications that words used in Odu Ifa, which you can translate. Most of my work has been done in translation, and in the process of trying to translate liturgical words, I discovered that the Yoruba language has 126 three-letter combinations, each which has a spiritual meaning, and that words are put together to form a sentence. And the method of putting those words together is Yoruba words begin and end in a vowel, so you drop one of the vowels because two vowels together doesn't work in the Yoruba language. But you're never quite certain which one it is, the last vowel of the preceding three-letter group or the first vowel of the next letter group. So you kind of, you've only got 5 or 6 choices, so you jockey them around until you find ones that make sense. And in the process of doing that, I found that the meaning of the words was much different than the meaning of the words in the dictionary.
Before we go there, Bob, because we're going to touch base on all that, like so. People can already see we are in for a treat and in for a lesson. Before we get there, though, we first want to talk about you,
okay,
and help people get an understanding of you. And so, walk us through your spiritual journey, because one thing that we always talk to our guests about is their individual spiritual journey. So tell us how you got to Ifa.
As a young man, I would say in high school, I had 2 passions. One was comparative religion, and the other was jazz. I've been a lifelong jazz musician. And, I grew up in a segregated white community, which was East LA at the time, believe it or not. Back in my day, that was a very segregated area. And, I heard a lot of racist comments about African Americans. And I'm thinking, have you heard John Coltrane play the saxophone? How can you not be impressed? Right. I mean, I'd give my left elbow to have that wisdom and knowledge and facility. Are you trying to tell me this guy is somehow inferior? Sorry, not buying it. You got to give me something else. So that kind of made me the odd man out from an early age. I also have to say the other thing that was very influential for me, my father, for complicated reasons, who's not Native American, was raised on an orphanage on the reservation. And so he grew up in First Nation culture. And, for a man his age back in the 50s, he did not tolerate racism, sexism, or homophobia. So those are not issues that I've struggled to change. They never were a part of my life, and I thank him for that. He was a very Obatala-esque type of person. I mean, he didn't know who Obatala was, but he was very kind, soft-spoken, never spoke critically of anybody. And the thing that made that all the more ironic is that he was an LA cop. And he was still kind to people, And the thing that makes it even more bizarre and probably unbelievable at this point, his partner, probably, I'd say his best friend and somebody who I was around kind of on the periphery, his partner was Gene Roddenberry.
I have no idea who that is.
Creator of Star Trek.
Oh.
Hello. You understand? So Gene Roddenberry believes that his stories were channeled to him from the future, so those were the kind of ideas that kind of informed my childhood. And when I went to UC Santa Barbara, like I said, and studied with Paul Tillich, I thought I was kind of an authority on comparative religions. That's kind of the curse of being a white guy thinking you know everything. So I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew everything about comparative religion, and then I was introduced to a Bimbe, right? And I thought, oh my God, I don't know anything about this. I'm an idiot. So that really motivated my curiosity, I have to say. And then it didn't take me long to figure out that Yoruba and Ifa and Orisa spiritual music was the basic for the rhythmic influence of jazz. When you learn about jazz history, the books say, well, based on African rhythms, but they never say African spiritual rhythms originating from Yoruba culture. I mean, if you listen to the drumming of Elvin Jones and the drumming coming out of Ode Ramo, it's the same thing. It's not similar. It's the same thing, So there's a history there and a legacy there that I think has been deliberately suppressed, which we can get into for various reasons. But at the time, this is a big part of my journey. This is a hard thing to talk about, but neither one of you are necessarily old enough to remember that, Lukumi and Santeria first came to the United States during the Muriel boat lift. You know what that is? When Castro freed a bunch of people from prison, and they were given diplomatic immunity as soon as they arrived in the United States. And that was a large community of Ifa Orisha people in that boat lift. And they were organizing to try and recapture the island. I mean, they were doing stuff that was, let's say, not necessarily legal to try and get a counter-revolution going. So they were they were not opening their doors to African Americans or European Americans because they were doing stuff they didn't want people to know about. But in the 60s and 70s, it was kind of a spiritual awakening, and African Americans in particular were really anxious to learn about African spirituality. Are you kidding? I mean, it was the first time it was openly available, and certainly in my lifetime. So there was a great enthusiasm, but also a great resentment, pain, and conflict over being excluded from those communities. So I don't know if you've heard of Bernard Simmons, Shango Dare, Awo Olafia, was able to get a, I can't remember her name, I'm sorry, but he was able to get a Puerto Rican madrina to teach him how to do initiations. And he created what I kind of subjectively call the African-American expression, Lukumi in America. He initiated over 1,000 people who were otherwise excluded from let's say, the Spanish-speaking part of our faith. And, there's reasons for that. I'm not trying to be judgmental here. This is just cultural things that occurred, right? So the first woman that he initiated on the East Coast was Ian Le Vincent, who's a real pioneer of our faith. I don't know if people realize that. But the first woman, I'm sure she was the first to be initiated on the West Coast, was Louisa Tiche, and she and I were partners at the time. So I was there at her initiation. And let's just say they were not enthused about her relationship with me and used that as an excuse not to teach her anything. And so I said, why don't we just go to Africa and study this at the source? And there was a man named John Turpin, who's known in the community as Fabemi, who had just come back from Africa. He was studying African economics, and William Bascom was his advisor. And Bascom said, if you want to understand African economics, you need to go get initiated. So he wasn't particularly interested in that, but he did get initiated. And in my conversation with him, at the time, it's hard to believe now with the internet and so on, but in those days, people thought Ifa no longer existed in Africa. It was thought it was dead. But Fabemi said no, and he said it's alive and well, right? And he showed me a picture of his Baba. And so that was the only lead I had. So I was blessed to be able to go to Africa with a group of 5 or 6 people. I tracked down the Arab, and to be honest, I was perfectly willing to accept the fact that when I asked him to initiate me, he'd roll his eyes and say, "No way." But in truth, he was very not. I was prepared for that. That could have happened, right? The other
Right.
thing that could have happened, I was thinking, okay, they're going to test me to make sure I'm ready to be initiated, right? And so at the time, I had read every book on Ifa printed in English, all 5 of them. They were all written by
Right.
anthropologists, and I was there for about an hour when I realized what I thought I knew was useless if they actually did test me. So it turns out, and in retrospect, the Araba is an interesting phenomenon here. And historically, kind of a couple of ideas converged on my first trip to Africa. The Araba had a vision that he wanted what he called Ifa seated well in the United States, right? I mean, he was really clear about that. But he was not clear about what the United States looked like or what the situation was with the faith. He just knew he wanted to share some of his wisdom with Ifa practitioners in other parts of the world. Well, that
Right.
was extremely controversial because in traditional Yoruba culture, you get initiated in the village where you're born. You understand?
Right.
So a lot of people in Africa got upset with him for initiating me, not because I'm of European descent, but because I wasn't born in Ode Ramo. I mean, that was a break from protocol and taboo, right?
Right.
And so that was kind of a big deal. But the thing that really, where I feel really blessed, and I want to be really, really clear about this. You like my books. That's nice, and I appreciate it. But those books are not from me. Those books are from my teachers in Ode Ramo.
Mm.
I want to name them specifically, and I want to share with you that the first day I was there, I realized that the Ifa school was the 10-year-olds teaching the 8-year-olds, the 12-year-olds teaching the 10-year-olds. You don't go talk to the Araba. He ain't got time for you. I knew the Araba for 25 years, and I think I maybe had 3 conversations with him. Where the training comes is from the younger students, right? And I
Right.
realized immediately that I was like a 6-year-old on a good day, right? So here's the point I want to make. Famui Wasu, Titi Layo Adesanya, and Abi Odun sat down with me, and during my first trip to Africa, which was about 3 weeks, they gave me enough information to write the book Iwa Pele and get started on the 2nd and 3rd book. The kids did that. On a good day, I'm a messenger for what they taught me. None of this is mine. I don't claim it. That's why I don't get upset with the problem with plagiarism. This is ancestral wisdom passed through the culture and internalized by children. In Ode Ramo, once a year on New Year's, they recite the entire corpus of Odu Ifa. The other rumor at the time was that Ifa was lost in Africa. No, there's nothing lost. Hear me, nothing at all is lost in Ifa in Africa. They recite the entire corpus of Odu. Takes 4 days from sun up to sundown. And if you hear the entire corpus, not these little cliff notes that we get printed in English, but if you hear the entire corpus, it includes detailed descriptions of all the rituals we do. And this recitation is done out in public for the community here. There are no secrets. There's nothing been lost. I mean, we need to be really clear about that. So
Okay.
what struck me is I was excited that I was like, oh, there's a whole bunch of information here that we didn't know, or I didn't know, and I didn't think anybody in the diaspora knew. And I have to say, my enthusiasm was not welcomed as much as I thought it would be. But one of the 2 things that were the most significant, there's a number of things that I discovered early on in studying with the kids. But one of the significant things that I learned is that Oriki, from the Elysian Orie Kiki, meaning praising the consciousness, which is the Yoruba word for invocation, is a fundamental aspect of all ritual, all offerings, all abo, all the work we do. You understand? And it was non-existent in the diaspora. And so when I realized that, I asked the kids to help me gather as many Oriki as I could. They started writing them down, reciting them, translating them. They even had some of them printed up from some kind of Ifa festival they had done recently. It was really remarkable. And so when I came back to the United States, I typed up about 300 Oriki, and I just made them available to the community for free. I just passed them out to whoever was interested. So to me, that was a huge contribution, and I'm not taking any credit for that. That was based on the vision of Araba Adisani, and also based on the knowledge and wisdom of very young children who are now, interestingly enough, all in their 40s and 50s. So as they grew in their understanding, our relationship became stronger and closer. And so now I'm talking to adults, and it's really was an unbelievable blessing, in my opinion. But, you know, the other thing that they taught me, hence the name of my first book, you know, there's a tendency in the diaspora, I believe, based on the mistranslation of Odu, to consider Abo or offerings an appeasement to angry gods. Sorry, wrong. None of the Orishas or spirits are ever angry at us. There's no indication of that in any verse of Odu. It's not part of the teachings of Orunmila. It is consistent with Christian theology, and certainly Christians have the right to believe they want. But in Yoruba creation myth, everybody's not born in original sin. They're born Omo Rere or Iwa Rere. Iwa means come. Wa means come. Iwa means the coming, or the coming from Orun to Aye, heaven to earth. Rere is an elision of Ire. So when you double a word in Yoruba, you're talking about the source. So children are born Iwa Rere, meaning linked to the fundamental goodness of all creation. In English, we call that innocence, right? So Iwa Pele is the spiritual discipline that becomes necessary when we lose our connection to our innocence through abuse, bad decisions, and struggling with emotional issues, right? So Iwa Pele is the foundation of our faith. A lot of people have tried to argue with me it's Iwa Rere. No, there's no spiritual discipline involved in Iwa Rere. That's inherent in human consciousness. So Iwa Pele, the point of Iwa Pele is to put the head and the heart in alignment, because only when the head and the heart are in alignment can you connect to your higher self, your Iponri, and it's that connection that gives us access to the ultimate states of consciousness.
We got Dafa, Ela, Egun, Awo, Inner Peace, Iwa Pele, the Sacred Ifa Technology, and like the individual books on the series on the Orishas. And those are just to name a few of the books that both Oseun and myself have of yours. So the question we have for you is, what made you actually want to start writing books?
This is going to sound strange, but I've been compelled to tell the truth. So here's the truth. My family were the mediums for the dragon families of Europe, right? I used to think that was a common thing that everybody had, but I think there's some people have an aptitude for being a medium, and others maybe not so much. It's kind of like Babe Ruth could hit a baseball. I mean, that was really a gift that he had. So I would argue, those that know me would probably be able to confirm that I'm a fairly effective and easy medium. So the truth is, I have the Araba connected me with an Egun who was an Awo, who is downloaded a lot of information on how we do things. I never rely on that by itself. Once I get the download, I check with the children that taught me to see if I was understanding things correctly. But I have to say, most of the books are completely channeled while I was in possession with Ela. Most of the books, I don't even remember what I wrote until I'm finished, and then read it and think, oh, that sounds kind of good. So it's kind of an odd phenomena. I've even read stuff people have quoted me, and I say, who wrote that? And it's like, oh, I wrote that. Okay, not really. That was some more channeled information. So in the context of Ifa, that's normal. It's the way it should be. I mean, who cares what David Wilson thinks about anything? But Falokun in possession with Ela might have some things to say. And it's
Right.
my belief, based on my study and also explicitly stated in Odu, Ifa is not studying in the sense of learning stuff. Ifa is about remembering. Okay, the spirit of Elah is a hologram of the entire history of creation, and being a medium for Elah gives us access to penetrating that beam of information, that frequency of information at specific places, really rooted in the problem that we're dealing with. So if you were to say, okay, get possessed by Elah, your head would explode because it's too much information. But if you say, what does Elah have to say about how I have a healthy relationship? That's kind of a thing that you can wrap your brain around. And I would say a further important point to make in the idea of information from spirit, there's a couple of points. One point I want to make is every 91 days, Egbe Ifa in Africa invokes the spirit of Elah, which shows up at the ritual in a form of a light beam with no medium. Elah actually manifests as a beam of light. And if we're not doing that, we still got things to learn from our African elders. So that beam of light then becomes a shapeshifter in that the Odu that is cast for the 91 days, meaning the next season, summer, winter, and so on. You say the Oriki, and then that beam of light morphs into the Orisha that's necessary to bring good fortune for the next 3 months. That's a remarkable phenomenon, and I'm really of the opinion that we need to spend a lot less time arguing over who's doing things correctly and try to figure out how to do things correctly, if you catch my drift,
Yes.
If we're not functioning at that level and arguing about doing stuff right, we're just self-delusional. It's an amazing thing. We've actually gotten 2 photographs of Elah entering a ritual. And you can see the Merkaba that are the foundation of Odu Ifa coded into the light beam. Tell me that's not a miracle. Tell me that's not remarkable. Tell me that doesn't give us a strong indication of the natural structure of reality. And tell me that's not one of the reasons why what we do is so suppressed and denigrated. Because I'm telling you, I grew up with the few who control the many. I grew up with the super rich. I can knock on their doors and they'll let me in. They know those secrets. They know they come from Africa, and they're doing everything they can to make sure you don't find out. Because the truth is, and here's the truth, and this is the important point I want to make tonight. If you want to translate Odu Ifa is coded reference to paleoscience, and that paleoscience is quantum physics. And if you don't understand quantum physics, you can't translate the Yoruba into English. Think about that. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to be a physicist. You can simplify those ideas, but if you don't understand that's what you're looking at, you're never going to find the appropriate translation, in my opinion. And here's where I don't know if quantum physics is a break from mechanical physics. Are you familiar with that history? Okay. So physics was based on Newton, and then it was modified by Einstein. And in the 30s, the big trauma for science in the West was the rules of stars and planets did not follow the same protocol as the rules for atoms. It was like a different set of instructions, right? And so the big reconciliation between those two was called the problem of unified field theory. And people Einstein tried for 30 years to come up with a unified field theory that worked, and he failed, right? So unified field theory really didn't come into its own until a man named David Bohm. Have you heard of him? David Bohm analyzed the universe by saying everything in creation has consciousness. That's the exact same thing that Ifa says.
Right.
Spirit is forces in nature. All forces in nature have consciousness. If we can't identify the force in nature with the Yoruba name we use for an Orisha, then we really don't understand that force in nature, do we? And so David Bohm made the point that because everything in creation has consciousness, creation is co-creation. Ifa says the same thing. We come together to pray to create a better world. So to take it even further, David Bohm's specialty was plasma. You know what plasma is? Plasma is a state between air and water. It's an in-between state. It's an invisible, like gas clouds, what you could call it, all right? David Bohm said plasma has consciousness, right? And he proved it. He did experiments. I won't go into it, but he proved that plasma has consciousness. What David Bohm didn't say, I think he knew it, but he didn't say it. And what Ifa does say, which gives us the edge to understanding the world we live in, because plasma has consciousness, we can communicate with it. That's the whole function of Eshu, all right? So let me explain to you what that means. Consciousness is generated by the 256 Merkaba that create Odu. And each of those Merkaba has a location in our brain which connects us to a frequency and a stream of information that allows us to see ourselves in the world. We were taught that there's only 6 senses. That's wrong. There's 250 senses, and each of them has a different frequency. And the point is that frequency is the same for you as it is for me. If you speak Spanish, the word estudiar and the word study light up in the same place in the brain at the same frequency. Language is just the cultural notation we make on a deeper level of understanding that we're all born with. And it's the task of Ifa initiation to unlock all 256 portals and give us the keys, the Oriki, that invoke our connection to those levels of consciousness. All right. So it's one thing to say universe is conscious. It's another thing to say I can speak to it and ask for guidance. And that's where quantum physics falls short of Ifa, in my opinion. And that's the place where I believe that Ifa paleoscience is superior to Western science by a lot. And I also believe, I don't believe, I could prove it if we have a lot of time, but the few who control the many know that you can communicate with nature, and they keep that a secret for the purposes of trying to exercise control over the phenomena. Well, the truth is that secret's coming out of the bag, and so what you're seeing in response is a kind of a frantic effort to condemn African forms of spirituality in an effort to make sure that the people embedded in the need for greed maintain control of the economy. If you really look at quantum physics, as is explained in Ifa, you've got 3 phenomena that can be engineered. One is mesmer field, it's anti-gravitational. The other is free energy. Once you have free energy, it's all over. Free energy means there's no cost for producing food, no cost for producing housing, no cost for travel. You couple free energy with levitation, you can go anywhere in creation, all right? So that technology, which was developed in Africa by Africans who still understand it and still use it, that technology is engineered by understanding that there's an interface between consciousness and the ancient stone machines that are found scattered throughout Africa. The pyramid is a machine, and it's run by consciousness, right? So we're at a point in history where we got 2 choices. We can elevate our consciousness through initiation and use free will to co-create the universe, or we can ask Elon Musk to put a brain chip in our brain and follow the guidelines of his. You know, if I got to choose between those 2, that's kind of a no-brainer. And so we have really at our disposal the ability to work around that nonsense. Calling it nonsense is kind. I really, let's change the subject. But the point is, we have the ability to make use of the ancient stone structures as machines. If you want, I can talk about that a little bit. But to me, we're at a historical moment where we need to meet together as a community and compare notes. You know, telling me that I don't do initiations correctly is a big snooze. It's also a violation of taboo. You know, Iwa Pele says, make no judgments. The minute you say, I don't know what I'm doing, you're making a judgment and indicating to the world that you have no idea what our faith is about. And so we need to start embracing that fundamental contradiction, I believe. I don't know. Did I answer the question? What's the next question? I went off on a rant.
Yeah, we still want to stick with your books a little bit. It was Inner Peace. You know, you just mentioned that that nature has consciousness, that everything is conscious, and Ifa says that everything has Orie. It was your book, Inner Peace, that gave me a little bit of working knowledge around the Orie complex.
Right.
Can you give us a little bit and explain to us a little bit what the
Yeah.
Orie complex is and what Orie means?
Yeah, I will. That's fine. Listen, I just need to tell you, too, for complicated legal reasons, Inner Peace is now called Orie, and it's got 50 additional pages. So don't pay $1,000 for it online. Buy the book Orie for $20, and it's the same material.
I'll show you.
Having said that, and I don't get any of the royalties from Inner Peace, so forget about that. So here's the point in terms of Orie, to answer your question. There are 256 Odu. Each represents a fundamental energy pattern in creation, which the Egyptians called a Merkaba, which is two counter-rotating, three-sided pyramids, right? Can you picture that?
Mm-hmm.
In a two-dimensional plane, that's the Star of David, the Seal of Solomon, 6-pointed star, right? 3 dimensions, it's 3, and it's important, 3-sided pyramids, because 3-sided pyramids has 4 points of contact with the sphere that contains it. You understand what I'm saying? There's 3 points of contact at the base and 1 point of contact at the apex, right? And each of those points of contact between the pyramid and the sphere, it's called a torsion sphere because it's a donut with a hole on the north and south pole. Each point of contact between the sphere and the pyramid is a portal called an Odu. It's an Odu within an Odu within an Odu. And that point of contact is a gateway between the energy of the invisible realm, or Orun, and the energy of the visible realm, or IA, all right? And that energy gates between the Odus through what's called a longitudinal light beam. A longitudinal light beam is a beam with no frequency. It's called Allah in Ifa. So the connection between all the Odus in the subatomic world is what's called quantum entanglement. Every Awo you've ever been to for divination wears the clothes with the eternal knot sewed around the neck. That's a symbol of quantum entanglement, the fact that everything's interconnected, as is the mat that we sit on as sacred space when we do divination. That's all symbolic of quantum entanglement, which means that if I affect an atom in Louisiana, it's going to influence all those atoms it's had contact with through trillions of light years in the universe. Everything is interactive, interconnected, and interrelated. All right. So what we do in the morning is we don't try and appease an angry God. We say, what do we do to expand our consciousness to solve today's problems and become more wise in the world, right? And so we're given an Odu, which is a metaphysical principle. We look for it to manifest, and then we know that the solution to that problem is the opposite Odu. So sometimes people get that confused. The opposite of Ogunda Osa would be Okanron Obar. You understand? So you want to develop your consciousness to a point where your understanding of Odu is such that you can see the problem and solution in the same moment. So that takes all the stress out of life. And the only way that you can really do that is by putting your head and heart in alignment. And what I mean by that is, you ever spent any time in New York? Have you ever seen somebody on the street saying, I'm going to kick your ass, and they're walking back? You can pretty sure that person is in inner conflict. But if they're saying, I'm going to kick your ass, and they're coming towards you full tilt boogie, you can be pretty sure their head and heart are in alignment. Well, it's the same way in life. Say what you mean. Say. Make sure your emotions match your thoughts, all right? So the point is that It's the movement between Iwa Rere and Iwa Pele. Childhood trauma causes a conflict between our head and our heart.
Yes.
And I'll give you the easiest example. If you were beaten up as a child by a guy in a yellow shirt, every time you see a guy in a yellow shirt, you're going to remember that day you were beaten up.
Mm-hmm.
That has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in the current moment. Right? And so because we're not taught this in Western culture, we want to get mad at the guy who's wearing the yellow shirt for making us upset. That's insane. We have to take responsibility for our feelings by looking at them. And what we're doing is we're taking a past memory and using it to try and protect ourselves from a future interaction, which is never possible. So we just keep going around circles, not resolving anything. Ifa says that if you're going to use Odu Ifa as an effective tool for developing Orie, hear me on this, you can never blame anybody for anything ever. That's a very radical thought. And some people hear me say that and hear me and think I'm saying you ignore racism, sexism, and homophobia. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you can choose your emotional reaction to those things.
Right.
And the more centered your reaction is, the more effective you'll be in changing it. You understand? So
Yes.
there's 256 Odus, and 255 of them, the pyramids are counter rotating, creating a gravitational field which keeps us in the world. In Ije-Ogbe, both pyramids are spinning in the same direction. That's called monoatomic. That creates an anti-gravitational field which allows our consciousness to separate from our body, go into the invisible realm, and see the true forces that are at play in terms of affecting our life, and then use that reality check to say the appropriate prayers that transform reality. In other words, you're not making effective use of that tool. Is if you have a broken carburetor and you change the muffler, you still got a broken carburetor. So the first step in effectively interpreting Odu is critical thinking. If you're blaming somebody for your problems, you're not engaged in critical thinking. If you think the Orishas are mad at you, you're not involved in critical thinking. Think about it. Fire is fire. Fire will always be fire. Fire has no other choice but to be fire. Fire is the spirit of Shango. You can use fire to heat a hot dog, read a book, warm your hands, but if you sit in the fire and burn your butt, it's not because Shango's mad at you, it's because you're being an idiot. And until we start to look at our relationship to spirit in that way, we're just going around in circles. You know, the dichotomy between Ire and EB that's used in divination. EB is the better word than Osobo. I don't know if you have a preference, but Osobo is actually a bad word in Yoruba. So we're going to use EB and Ire. EB means placenta. So the placenta is essential to life when you're in the womb, but when you're born, it becomes toxic. So that's the image, letting go of ideas that no longer work. Right? Ire means embracing the lesson. It's that simple. It's got nothing to do with angry gods and appeasing them and making sacrifice. The word for Ebo is not sacrifice. It's been mistranslated for that, and we're buying the okie doke. Stop it. The word Ebo, sorry. The word Ebo from the Legion Bo means the hearing or the listening or the remembering. It's a process for getting in touch with our higher self, which is then connected to the source of creation and gives us the inspiration to expand our consciousness. There's no sacrifice in any of that at all, ever. You know, we kill animals to feed the elders who come to pray on our behalf, not because there's some magic in goat blood. That's got to be one of the dumbest ideas ever. And yet it's common to believe that goat blood's going to fix something. It's not. Life doesn't work that way. If you're an alcoholic and I kill a goat, I guarantee you're still an alcoholic. But if you're an alcoholic and start dealing with the issues that are causing your drinking, then you have a choice. You have a possibility of experiencing Orie. So the difficulty becomes, and the challenge becomes, and the thing that we need to train people on, the reason we need to come together and compare notes. When you're in an Ije Ogbe state of consciousness, the laws of physics change. And if you don't understand those laws, you will be profoundly disoriented and ineffective when you enter the realm of Orun.
Now, Baba, I got to push back on you a little bit, because if I don't say this right, then I'm gonna get messages from people that's gonna be, why you ain't say nothing? Because we know that, anytime I done sacrifice a rooster, then whatever I prayed for came to fruition. So that's going to be one.
Yeah. And listen, and I would argue that it came to fruition as a consequence of intention, not appeasing an angry God. And I would also argue that it's inconceivable of Africa to offer blood to an Orisha without eating the bird. That just doesn't happen. It does not happen. So there's a sense of creating kosher food. So let's look at it this way. Alchemy is the wedding between science, ritual, and magic, all right? So science is understanding the way the real world works, which is, for us in Ifa, is a matter of understanding the metaphysical principles of Odu. That is the foundation of our science. And then we use that information to come together to do collective prayer. So if you and I pray together, it's not twice as good, it's 3 times as good. If the 3 of us pray together, it's 9 times as good. If 16 people come together and pray, you're changing physical reality as you speak, at which point the ritual becomes magical. But the only way you can change physical reality through the use of alchemy is by joining hands with a shared intention. I don't know if either of you are musicians, but you can have 6 of the best musicians in the world and a 7th guy that can't keep a rhythm and the band sounds terrible. It's the same thing with prayer. You can have 15 Awo praying for your well-being and 1 Awo looking at his cell phone, and the prayers are going to be useless. So the issue, my point is that intention is more important than the ritual itself. In Ode Ramo, they say, if you can only afford to offer dirt and your prayers will be answered. I have never, in 35 years of going to Africa in Ode Ramo, seen anything used in ritual except blood, dirt, mud, and leaves. 4 things. And I've seen physical reality change in front of my eyes. So
you're saying I don't have to go and, find an African store to get some cola nut and bitter cola. I need palm oil. What about honey, gin, snail, dry fish?
No, I'm not saying that. There's a certain, okay, let's look at it this way. I'm going to tell you the secret of initiation. You ready? You're sitting down. This was worth inviting me to the lecture today. I'm going to give you the secret of initiation. All right.
Okay.
It's kind of strange for somebody like me to say, oh, come to me for initiation. I'll put you in possession with ancient African deities. I mean, how can I say that with any confidence? And here's the answer to that question. I put you in possession by going in possession first and getting close enough to you for you to feel the ashe. Possession is contagious. You understand that concept? And I go into possession by repeating the words that were said to me when my Baba put me into possession. That's a mnemonic memory device that perpetuates the tradition. We're just doing that for each other because we can. You understand? So look at it this way. A bow is a small initiation. Initiation is a big bow. So what do I mean by that? If I'm a diviner, the process of fixing the problem is for me to radically identify with your pain. I need to become you, and I need to become your confusion. That's called quantum entanglement. That's why we wear the little robes with the universal knot around the neck to remind us that that's our job, all right? So we feel the pain because we know that the solution to removing the pain is the opposite Odu. We invoke that. But the point is, once we identify with your pain, we become quantumly connected in the way that when I let go of the problem, you do too. That's where the magic and the power in a bow comes from, is the connection between Orie, that's in resistance, and Orie, that's in liberation. And it's the dynamic, which is on a really invisible, subjective level, that allows that to happen. If you're not engaged in that process, then you're not doing Ifa based on the teachings of the prophet Oromila. And so let's look at it a different way. If you come to me and say, should I go to college? Will it help my income at work? And Oda comes up and says, yes, definitely. So what's the abo for that, Oda? You know?
Enroll in college.
Yes. Hello. The only reason we do rituals involving birds and prayers is because we're in resistance to enrolling in college.
So that helps to remove the resistance.
And that helps. It does remove the resistance. That's the whole point of the ritual. And so what we do is we pray. Ebo is either based on Ire Egun, we ask the ancestors for guidance. Ire Orie, we clean away the negativity that clouds our vision. Ire Orisha, we ask Orisha to show us how our actions are going to change. And then the Ire Ifa. Now, it's important to understand this. One Awo cannot do Abo for Ire Ifa. Can't do it. That's not the point. The reason we kill a goat for Ifa Ebos is to feed the 16 Awos that come to pray for us collectively. And here's how that works. If you're sick and 16 grandfathers surround you, go into possession with Allah, point their finger at you and say, you're not sick anymore, guess what happens?
You're not sick.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the collective power of the guidance from the elders. That's got nothing to do with goat blood. You know, goat, you have to understand. You don't have to understand. It was my perception. Eating goat's a big deal, you know. First week I was no de remo. It was pepe soup and fufu 3 times a day, right? When it came time to do the abo, the whole village turned out and wanted a piece of meat. I mean, it's a big, big deal, you know. Right. The equivalent in America would be to do an abo and order a dozen Papa John pizzas. You know, it's the communal element that we're dealing with. You understand? Not the notion there's something magical in blood. You know, and that notion comes to us from the Catholic Church. You know, the Pope sacrifices, and I mean the word sacrifice, a sheep every Easter to reanimate the Eucharist. He kills a sheep, doesn't eat it, and that is believed to infuse the bread and the wine with the blood and the body of Jesus, you know, and so that's fine. That's their belief, but that's got nothing to do with Ifa. And so that idea has come to be kind of glommed onto our faith in a way that is not consistent with the history of our beliefs.
So I want to also push back a little bit, or not push back, or just throw out the prevailing perspective when it comes to sacrifice. Because I know I've heard you say that sacrifice has no place in our tradition.
Not at all. Not a part sacrifice of giving up something to appease an angry spirit. Look up the definition. That's what the word means. What we do when we're making offerings is we're asking the spirit of light to return us to our original state of innocence in which we know everything. There's no sacrifice involved in that process. Connection to the spirit.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
When you connect to the spirit of light, it creates a profound sense of inner peace called suru in Yoruba. Inner peace is the point of all the rituals we do, to put the head and heart in alignment and experience inner peace so that we can be receptive to the great joy that comes with unconditional love.
So suru is in patience? Because I've always seen it translated as patience.
You could call it that, but if you go to traditional Yoruba culture, a elder is judged by his ability to sit quietly and not say anything. If you see an elder sitting on the front porch, seeming to enjoy sitting on the front porch, you know that you're dealing with somebody very wise. You understand? Because they're comfortable in their own skin. Listen, consider this and think about it in terms of the way Ifa is practiced in the diaspora. In Africa, it's absolutely taboo for me, as the older man in the room, to give either one of you any advice about anything unless you ask for it. How many times have you been to a ceremony when somebody said, "Oh, yeah, well, you've got some evil egos. For $90, I'll clean it off"? There's nothing suru in that. You know, your karma is your karma. It's none of my business unless you ask me to engage in it. And when I'm not being asked, I'm not worried about, okay, I got to hustle up some business because my light bill's due. It's about trusting that we live in an abundant universe that'll take care of you.
Right.
And that's reflected in how you carry yourself in the world. You know, somebody who's in suru would never make a judgment of another person, never say anything that would denigrate another person. Here's the test of suru, in my opinion. If you have an encounter with what I would call, it's called an authentic Awo, an Awo who's done the homework of practicing the discipline of Awo Falokun. When you're in the presence of such a person, man or woman, you always, let me say that again, always come away from that encounter feeling better. If you have an encounter with an elder where you feel shamed, denigrated, abused, dismissed, criticized, any of those things, that's perpetration of the problem and not any indication of the ability to fix a problem. Once I call you out of name, I've made an enemy for life. That breaks our trust, and trust is the hardest thing to rekindle there is in human interaction. So we avoid that problem, but you're just not going there, you know? You know, you and I can disagree, and I can say my point of view is this. That's different than me saying you're an idiot for believing that. And so we, as Awo, it's really important that we choose our words carefully. That, you know, and what the biggest influence in our faith right now, do you know what I think the biggest influence on what we do is? Who's the most influential person on spirituality in every form in America, you know? I would say that's Kim Kardashian, who lets no insult go. You know, I mean, that's about a 6-year-old behavior, and yet people are emulating that all the time. Well, you said this about me, and I can't let that slide because you know, he offended me. Get over it. You know, Ifa says your opinion of me is none of my business.
That's a
hard thing to hold. That's a hard thing to hold. But
absolutely.
It's the only way you can get to inner peace.
That's true. Now, so with the thing on sacrifice,
right?
A lot of people, there's obviously that aspect of Ebo, blood sacrifice. But then there's also that aspect of sacrifice that talks about, you know, giving up of something or foregoing something in order to gain something of better value.
Yeah, okay. So listen, I'm going to say two things about it. The first thing is I'm not against making offerings. I've killed as many animals as anybody. I'm good at it because I'm a son of Ogun. I'm not saying don't do that.
Right.
I'm saying let's be clear about the purpose. I'm making kosher food, literally, and I do it well, right?
Right.
Name me the Odu that says sacrifice behavior. Exactly. So, you know, it's one thing to claim something. It's another thing to support it with a direct reference to the teachings of the prophet Orumila. We need to stop with this made up stuff and get down to the point. You know, there's a whole bunch of Odus that were created. I don't know if I'm going to get into this. Some of the Odus in the diaspora use are deliberately negative. And a man named Fernando Ortiz asked the elders in Cuba in the 40s why that was so. And their response was, well, we need to scare people into paying us money to do ritual work. All right. That's not a good reason for doing something.
That's going to be controversial. That's going to be controversial, Bob.
Well, it doesn't mean it's wrong. You know,
Right.
if you want to talk about the issue of sacrificing behavior, that's rooted into conceptualizing Iwa Pele. I'm going to sacrifice my need to criticize other people. I'm going to sacrifice my need to denigrate other people. I'm going to sacrifice my need to make people feel bad. I'm going to sacrifice my need to shame others. I'm going to sacrifice my need to feel superior to other people. So you can call those things sacrifice in that sense. But I think the more appropriate Yoruba language is to honor taboo. Big difference. You know, the word for taboo in Yoruba is Ra. So let's look at the language. The issue for divination, Odara. What does that mean? From the legion Odadara, meaning the spirit that divides taboo, that illuminates the taboo that's appropriate to guide my life. I'm still not hearing the word sacrifice in that, you know, showing us the easiest way to get from here to there without going astray. I mean, it's really that simple. So, you know, the idea of sacrificing behavior is related to the Christian idea of I can do anything I want as long as I believe in Jesus. That means I'm going to heaven. And if I make an offering, all will be forgiven. Those are cute ideas. You can believe them if you want, but I maintain they got nothing to do with teaching to the prophet Romeo. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. If you want to believe otherwise, that's fine. I believe in freedom religion. I would never criticize that. I'm simply saying, show me the odus that indicate I'm wrong. And analyze the language in a way that accurately expresses that idea.
So when these odus talk about, you know, giving these stories, and it says that the Babalawo will prescribe certain things, and sometimes these certain things were animals. What were these odus? What were these odus then talking about?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what we're talking about. If you're familiar with Folobi Pega's version of Odu Ifa, you familiar with that one?
Yes, sir.
The Sacred Ifa Oracle?
Yeah, the Ifa Oracle. Every one of those verses has a long list of elements used for making a bow, right?
Right.
Most of them, not all of them. Most of them have a long list of stuff, right? But you have to know how to read that list, all right? The list always includes Adimu for the ancestors, pigeons to clean the head, birds for the Orisha, and four-legged for Ifa, right? Every one of them. Sometimes it's a goat and a sheep or a hen or a guinea head. There's variations, but they all include those four elements. So if you do divination and the support for the resistance comes from the ancestors, all you do is offer the Adimu listed in that list, and you forget the other stuff. That's what you're taught in African schools of divination, all right?
So let me just make sure I'm hearing you clearly on that one, Bob. So, and Bobby Peg is our bag, but that's our Aluo's Aluo. So what you're saying is those things are listed, and essentially you give one depending on what energy you have to appease.
Not quite. Let me finish my statement. You're close. So there's four types of E-Ray, meaning four rituals done to transform EB into E-Ray. One is from the ancestors, one's from Orie, one's from Orisha, and one's from Ifa. Those are accumulative. So if you need to appeal to the ancestors to transform consciousness, you simply make the offering to the ancestors. If you need to clean the head, you make the offering to the ancestors and you clean the head with a pigeon. If you need to appeal to the Orishas, you make the offering to the ancestors, you clean the head, and then you make an offering to the Orishas. If you have to appeal to Ire Ifa, you always invite the entire egg bay. And as part of cultural protocol, you don't invite 16 people to come and work at your house without feeding them. You know, this is a rural culture. And when I first started going to Ode Ramo, there was no money in the community. I used to joke there was 20 naira and people took turns holding on to it. All the rate of exchange was through food and resources.
Mm.
So killing a goat to have 16 men men and women come and pray for you is an exchange of resources between you and the people that are doing the ritual. It needs to be placed in cultural context. We have no context for that. We can't. In
Right.
Ode Remo, you would not ever eat a goat unless it was in a ritual environment. People are not killing goats because they feel like a barbecue to watch the big game on Sunday. That doesn't happen. You know, making an abo is like Christmas, Easter, New Year's, and your birthday all wrapped in one. And it's a big, big deal. People fight over who's getting what piece of meat, you know, because it's not that common. So if we're not putting in that context, then I think we're not fully understanding the full potential for
Absolutely.
making those rituals effective.
You know, this is this is very different, right? So I'm kind of stuck on this Ebo and offering thing. Is it possible that the reason many people believe that Ebo means the sacrificing of animals is because when those animals are sacrificed, the blood is placed on certain.
No, that's not why many people believe it. People believe it because two Jesuit priests in the 1800s wrote the Yoruba English dictionary and deliberately mistranslated that word so that you would use Christian concepts to block the true power, glory, and effectiveness of alchemy as taught by the prophet Orumila. There's no if or maybe about it. That was a deliberate deception. So the question is, are we going to allow ourselves to be deceived? Or are we going to study the meaning of language so we can get to the truth of the matter? That's the only question from my point of view. Now, you know, if you want to believe it means sacrifice, God bless you, and I hope it works. And, you know, if it doesn't work, try doing it through the Christian church. I don't care. But if you ask me my opinion based on 35 years of studying the Yoruba language, abo does not mean sacrifice. I'll give you the classic example of when I had an epiphany around the issue of language. When I wrote Iwa Pele, I wanted to write about a ritual that's done in Ogboni that it creates appeasement between the men and the women when there's gender conflict. That ritual is called Ifa Ya Ballet. All right, so if you speak any Yoruba at all, it's really clear that Ifa Ya Ballet is an elision of the words Ifa Ye Baba Ile, meaning the wisdom of the fathers and the mothers of earth. I don't know anybody that speaks Yoruba that would translate it any differently, except for the two Jesuit priests that wrote the English Yoruba dictionary. Here's how they translated it. I remember the translation word for word because it changed my life. It was in a moment of epiphany. You know the dictionary definition of Ifa Ya Ballet? Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you down? If you got a bungee cord you to your chair so you don't fly off the handle here. The original, and it's not true anymore, I don't think, but the original English Yoruba dictionary translates Ifa Ya Ballet as the ascension of our Lord and Master Jesus Christ to sit at the right hand of God our Father. I'm pretty sure that's not an accurate translation. Pretty sure. So at that point, I said, okay, I need to take another look at this. And the big boon, the big help in that, I don't know if you've seen Bascom's book on Odu Ifa, but he had the good sense to present the verses in Yoruba, standalone, and then he presented them word for word, literal translation. So if you study Yoruba, you'll know that a word for word literal translation in English makes no sense at all. Has no, it's just gibberish. So then he did a third verse in which English speaking, Yoruba speaking elders tried to convey those messages in the best English that they could, knowing full well that I would say 80% of the vocabulary of Odu Ifa related to alchemy and quantum physics has no English equivalent, and it's certainly not represented by Christian ideas, you understand? So what I did is I made note cards of the entire book that Bascom wrote, of the literal meaning of the words that were translated directly into English, and then started using those to piece together the elisions. Once you start doing that, you get a whole different perspective, you know? And I realize that's a lot of work. Not everybody can do that. Certainly not everybody believes or trusts in my ability to do that. But in the process of doing that, for me, it's been a great source of illumination and profound understanding. I believe that, let me tell you why I think it's important. You want to know the secret of alchemy? Are you ready for that? See, I'm going to give you two secrets tonight. I gave you the secret of initiation. Now I'm going to give you the secret of alchemy. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? You want one?
Yep.
Yes, sir. We're ready.
I stand on this because my family were keepers of the secret for a long time. So essentially, if you take platinum and heat it to 1800 degrees, there will be a burn off of what's called iridium. Okay. Iridium is what's known as a what's it called? It's known as an honorable element, a noble element. Sorry, noble element. And what happens with iridium when it burns off of platinum? If you take the iridium and heat it up to 1500 degrees, 60% of the sample disappears. You understand?
And what's the temperature again?
1500
for the
degrees.
iridium. 1500.
Yeah, 1500 degrees. It takes powdered form. You heat up the powder. 60% of the sample disappears, and then it reappears. The full 60% reappears. It disappears and reappears. You can get a kiln and do the experiment yourself. It's not a big mystery. It's documented in scientific literature. So the first thing that tells you is that iridium is interdimensional. It is proof that we live in a multidimensional universe. Ifa identifies at least 10 dimensions that influence how we function in the world, and iridium is the turning point for verifying that from a scientific point of view. So what happens with iridium when it returns in its full force, it shifts from gravitational force field to a mesmer field. Iridium is the physical manifestation of the split between 255 Odu and E.J. Ogbe. So iridium, the three-sided pyramids are both spinning in the same direction, means there's no gravitational field within the atoms of iridium. All right. So once you eliminate the gravitational field, here's what it means. You can take a line of iridium, like planing a line down the highway, and you can move 1,000-ton stone brick with one finger, and the only thing you need to do is throw a rope over it so it doesn't float away. Are you feeling me here? So iridium also has the ability to reorganize matter. So iridium, in a sense, is a clean slate in terms of atomic structure. If you take a bowl of iron and you heat it up, and then you put a drop of gold into the bowl and a drop of iridium, all the iron will change to gold because it'll organize around the transformative quality of the E.J. Ogbe state represented by the iridium itself.
So why wouldn't people just get a whole bunch of iron, a little bit of gold, and then turn it all to gold? We all be rich.
What makes you think they're not doing that? Every single gold statue in ancient Egypt is made by alchemy and not natural gold. Think about it. Have you seen the statue, or not the statue, the tomb of King Tut? It's like 6 layers of gold, perfectly inlaid layer after layer. So think about this. You're an ancient Egyptian, which according to Dr. Hawass and David Lerner, only had a chisel and a stone to work with. So you take your block of gold and you use that to make King Tut's tomb. There's a missing step there. Can you feel me on it? So what's done is they make alchemical gold, they liquefy it, they pour it over the wooden statue, and then they attach it to the statue through electroplating. Ancient Egyptians had the secret of creating batteries that made electricity. And the secret was the same secret that Tesla rediscovered. An ancient Egyptian battery is a circle of iridium with a magnet on either side, which creates a superconductor, which is an unlimited flow of electricity. All right. And so if you see in the Tesla's car, he used the same battery for his car that he built 80 years ago, and it's still running on the original charge. Elon
Wow.
Musk, who claims to be using Tesla technology, has a battery that lasts for 2 weeks and it costs $20,000. Sorry, same thing. Not the same thing. So here's the point.
Yeah.
Are you ready to go out in La La Land? We're going to go out to La La Land now in our discussion of alchemy.
Yes, yeah.
Iridium was placed inside the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm.
The Ark of the Covenant was not one thing. Egyptians have identified at least 200 Arks of the Covenant scattered throughout East Africa, and most of them being in what is now Ethiopia. The Ark of the Covenant, let's call it that for lack of a better word, is alternating layers of gold and wood, which makes it a capacitor. So iridium is a superconductor and the arc is a capacitor, which means it stores electricity generated by the iridium. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so news flash, the dimensions of the ark, which we have from the book of Exodus, the dimensions of the ark is the exact same dimensions as the tomb in the king's chamber in the pyramid at Giza. You understand? That chamber was built to hold the Ark of the Covenant. So the pyramid itself is a giant capacitor.
Right.
Once you stimulate a longitudinal light beam through the use of iridium, the light beam extends to the ends of the universe in all directions and gets stronger as it moves away from source. That means the pyramid was a capacitor to create free energy for the entire planet. So once you know the secret of how to be initiated in the way that allows you to connect your Orie to the machine, then you can guide the electricity from the pyramid to terraform the earth, to heal illness, and you can use it as a weapon. The pyramid was used to fight a war with the people who lived on Mars and a planet called Vulcan, which was destroyed by the pyramids and turned into the asteroid belt. And at least you think I'm making that up. The Egyptians themselves say that on the temple hieroglyphics in Luxor, and the only reason we don't believe it is because Dr. Wass says we shouldn't believe it. Well, shame on him. The Egyptians said what they meant and meant what they said. And I'm telling you how they did what they did. And I'm also telling you that the pyramids were not disassembled to build mosques by the Muslims in 1500. They were disassembled by the daughters of Sheba, who were appalled at the use of the pyramid for war.
So I got a question then.
There's more to this, but we'll put that on. We'll put a pin in it.
So to have this type of technology,
right?
I think the common sense question then becomes, how was ancient Egypt conquered so many different times?
Yeah, that's a good question. Listen, that requires a little bit of a history. The Egyptian Kings List identifies Egyptian culture as 250,000 years old. Most people have a little bit of trouble with that, but I'll confirm that. All you have to do is go to the gold mines in South Africa and see that the fossilized catfish in the food pits in those mines is filled with bones from fish that have been extinct for 150,000 years. We have Africans in South Africa mining for gold 200,000 years ago.
I've been there in South Africa.
Have you been to the stone circles?
I went to what they call the cradle of civilization.
Yes, Adam's calendar.
Yeah, I've been there.
If you look out over Adam's calendar, there's a series of stone circles, maybe 20 feet in circumference, and each of those circles has a pattern for a different frequency. and the frequencies generate energy, and those circles are connected with stone highways, which is like stone fences. There's not highways because you can't get into them, but the stone circles are connected, and they create a energy resource that's linked from South Africa to the Egyptian Giza Peninsula. A man named Michael Tillinger has photographed these circles and has cataloged over 10 million of them. All right. So what the ancient Egyptians were doing with those machines is they were creating gold in the earth. That's the richest location of gold anywhere, right? And you're familiar with the KwaZulu culture?
Yeah.
KwaZulu means we come from Mars. That's what the words mean. The word Cairo in Coptic Egyptian means Mars. So there's an inference of what I would call extraterrestrial and interdimensional connection. And that's not to diminish the contribution of Africans. They were able to make those connections, make those alliances, and preserve those mysteries. All right. So the essence of alchemy was destroyed by what's called the Lesser Dryas, which happened 12,000 years ago. There was a global flood, and Africa essentially the culture was destroyed. And so after the flood, people moved into the African basin, but had lost their understanding of how to make the machines work. So if we look at the flood 12,000 years ago, there's about a dozen places where those mysteries were preserved. Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania, the mountains of Peru. They were preserved in Mexico. They were preserved in the Caribbean basin, which was probably at one time Atlantis, that was rediscovered by Paul Zelinsky, who took pictures of a stone city off the coast of Bimini. And they were preserved, I'm sure, in the Antarctic, and they were preserved in the Easter Islands. So we have places where the information about how to use those ancient stone temples was preserved. All right. And we see the first reclaiming of that ancient technology when ancient Transylvanian culture is called Thracian. The Thracians were 15 feet tall. There's clear history of them with being never defeated by the Roman Empire. And they created a thing called Scythian culture, which is the proper name for gypsies. So they had a culture that traveled from Hungary to eastern end of China, Siberia, back to Africa, into Africa. And there's evidence of the connection between Sumerian culture and Egyptian culture in the temple at Sinai, which is a kiln for making iridium. And the kiln has instructions on the walls in both Sumerian language and Coptic Egyptian that explain what it is. So the story of Moses is the story of initiation into the mystery of alchemy. Clearly, all right. And the texts also say that part of that mystery was reclaimed when King Akhenaten migrated in a boat from the Caribbean to Egypt, identifying him as an Atlantean, all right? So here's the key point. Those mysteries are the foundation of a culture that doesn't use money, that advocates the value of unconditional love, and places great value on extended family. You understand? Now, if you're able to enter that arena with the intention of claiming those secrets for yourself, and if you're willing to kill people to get those secrets, you win. Now, I can trace a long history of that. Maybe we'll do that history as part of a longer dialogue in the future. We'll kick that idea around. But you can see clearly how the political forces that were willing to kill people to claim those secrets and keep them a secret is really at the core of the current crisis in global politics. I really believe that let's call it the white European few who control the many, who I grew up with and who I know by name, know and understand what they believe, are engaged in an active, flagrant, flat-out effort at genocide directed towards people of color. If we don't appreciate that's what's going on, we're going to suffer the consequences once again in response to your question. And so the art of brainwashing, the art of internalized oppression, the art of confusing people, the art of making people feel compelled to follow the narrative is horrendous. I mean, the political manipulation of the economy in Africa is nothing. And so my question is, who in African-based religious community is making a political issue of that and organizing, trying to change it? Nigeria is in terms of natural resources, is the wealthiest country in the world. And according to international law, they have the highest quality of oil in the world. According to international law, every drop of oil that's exported from the country, the people who live there need to be compensated with money. If you live in Alaska, that law applies. Everybody living in Alaska gets a $10,000 check, man, woman, and child. The same thing should be true in Nigeria, but it's not. So the question is, why isn't it? That's the law. That's international law. That's the way things be. There's precedent for that. There's no wiggle room in terms of interpreting that or denying the people of Nigeria that money, and yet they have 80% unemployment. So who in the Ifa Orisha community is making an issue of that? And the answer is nobody. So in terms of your question, is how did that happen? That's how it happened. So be able to fight is a call to courage, and it's a call to courage that requires joining hands. It's also a call to courage that involves a simple recognition that the majority of people are not part of the cult of the few who control the many. All we have to do is stand up and say, we're not buying your BS anymore. That's all it would take. But the courage to do that is not being taught as part of the Ebola process. Every call to courage. It's a call to let go of your short-sighted view of the world, experience what you could call the sacrifice, but the death of the old consciousness to embrace the new. There's nothing humans will resist more than letting go the way they think about themselves in the world. That's scary stuff. But in order to face the world as it is, we need to go through those rites of passage, I call them, in which we expand our consciousness. You know,
absolutely. Yes, sir. It does very well.
You know, you said something about Akhenaten, Pharaoh Akhenaten, coming from the Caribbean, which was possibly Atlantis, and you have some people saying that that Ifa possibly came out of Egypt or Kemet. What do you have to say about that? About Ifa?
I'll address that directly. People have criticized me, including my good friend and mentor Baba Hochi, for attributing Ifa ideas to Egypt. You know, and I understand that's a controversial topic and that it's touchy for people. But here's the point: all the Obas that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a number of them, claim to be descendants of Egyptian pharaohs. Also, if the language is 30% Coptic Egyptian, it has to have an Egyptian influence. It just has to. That's the way linguistics works. You know, you're not going to get up today and think, okay, I'm going to start speaking Hungarian. I mean, that's just not going to happen. There's got to be a reason for making that choice. And the reason was the internalization of the wisdom. You know, here's the real kicker too. The initiation for Pharaoh is not similar to the initiation for Oba. It's exactly the same thing. Now, you can call that a coincidence if you would like. I don't believe that for a minute. The other thing that's kind of hard to hear but true.
This is Awo Oseun, and you are enjoying the Who Made Y'all Priest podcast. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversations with Awo Falokun Fatunmbi.